Hey everybody, my name is Billy Carlson here. I'm with my friend Camay from SwipeSense. We're chatting about design. So this series is designed for people new to design, people who are interested in learning design. And what we're hoping to do with this little video series is sort of uncover the mysteries of what designers do and how they do it. So welcome Camay, and please tell us a little about yourself.
Thanks, Billy. Thanks for having me. I am a product designer. I'm the senior product designer right now at SwipeSense, where we're aiming to improve the lives of patients in hospital care settings through a variety of products.
Awesome.
I currently am involved in all phases of the product design and development, from research, sketching, ideation, facilitation, all the way to like UI prototypes and figuring out high fidelity interactions and collaborating with engineers. So really end to end.
Very cool, yeah. I knew that, so that's why I wanted to chat with you, because I think you'd be a perfect person to sort of explain the whole process. So maybe we can dig into some of the details. So yeah, can you briefly walk us through, like, let's say, your design process for a new product?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so typically I'm brought in once the I guess space has been kind of researched a little bit by our product manager or your VP of product to vet out whether this is even an area that we want to go in. We have kind of, at least for our third product that we're currently working on, we have done a couple sessions where we're just like, what is even possible with our core technology? What are some avenues? And then let's just start mapping them and talking to people to see if that's even like a possible route. I think that's where designers can lend their strengths the most, is helping people just get what's out of their own minds, either by asking questions, facilitating, or drawing it on a whiteboard. And just like the ability to see what was in your mind on a whiteboard is super, super helpful in just, seeing either it's a massive problem or a small scale problem, or like not as risky as you thought. It just helps people gain perspective on the problems that they're trying to solve. So from there, once we kind of figure out, okay, maybe we need to explore this, we'll try to recruit people in the field to talk to. And that's done with typically user interviews. We're trying to find ways to kind of speed up the process from like discovery to like even lo-fi fidelity sketches. And something that we're trying to do is just come up with hypotheses from the get-go, even if it's completely wrong, so that hopefully we can like strike those off faster and just like kind of get to the core understanding of these people's worlds, what problems they're facing, goals, motivations, etc. And then pretty typical to what you hear or read about human-centered design. You know, it's that like spirally loop from like wide to narrow, and you just iterate from low fidelity and kind of scope in, or you'll realize actually we need to take a step back and then zoom back in until you feel confident enough to ship something.
Very cool. So a little recap. So I'm thinking you're helping stakeholders in the beginning visualize their concepts, or even pulling their concepts out of their ideas. We sort of call that making sure we're solving the right problem. That's sort of step one, understanding the stakeholder perspective. And then step two, you're going out and talking to the users, the potential users of this product, to see what their needs are. Very interesting. And then obviously diving more into the nitty gritty of the design process, which we can talk about a little bit later. But I am curious, is there a difference between designing a new product or enhancing an existing one, or adding a feature to another product?
I think the biggest difference is in how much research is necessary. So I just talked about, doing discovery and user interviews. There's a little bit less of that for future improvements. I guess it kind of depends on the scope or scale of the future improvement. So recently, we just did some to increase transparency of our data by adding just little additional pieces of information into what we call it's almost like an activity log of our users' hand hygiene activity. Just a little context: we monitor hand hygiene activity from nurses and other caregivers in the hospital. So we've had some feedback about, well, I don't really understand these visits, or I feel like some of my activity is not captured. And so we added ways for them to either see that we actually have seen their activity, but explain why it's not calculated or why it's not included. And all that really looks like, if you're imagining a view with a table, it's like just another line that says 2 visits were seen but not calculated. So little things like that, or even adding the similar to any reporting, if you're looking at Instagram and you want to report a post, something similar. We added something similar to that, where those are smaller features but still product improvements.
Yeah.
And that scope or that problem was pretty well understood just based on customer feedback through the customer success channels and things like that. And so it was more of a practical usability type of testing and less discovery. Yeah. So I would say that's kind of where the big differences are, is essentially comes down how much you know about the problem.
Yeah, that's really interesting. That's cool. Actually, I'm thinking maybe you can dive in and discuss what the hand hygiene app is, so that we can sort of talk about maybe the design of that particular product. So just give the viewers maybe a quick little insight of what that is, maybe what it looks like. Talk about it. We can mentally picture it.
Yeah. Right. So SwipeSense first, I guess, flagship product is Hand Hygiene, and we're an IoT company, so we have hardware installed throughout the hospital, and it's like a network of devices that picks up the signals from each other. Caregivers which includes physicians, nurses, patient transport, EBS, which are the people who clean the rooms, anyone who essentially interacts with the patient, is given a badge. And then we also have what we call drip guards that sit underneath soap or sanitizer dispensers. And so when a caregiver goes in or out of a room and uses that dispenser, that drip guard sensor will pick up the signal from the caregiver badge and then send that data back to our dashboard, which then is used by the infection prevention team inside hospitals. And their goals are to have processes and measurement methods in place to prevent as many hospital-acquired infections as possible. And hand washing is kind of at the core baseline of preventing spread of germs. So that's one of our main products. And I don't really touch the hardware side. I'm focused mostly on the software side and really trying to present the data in a way that helps the infection preventionist understand what's the state of their hand hygiene inside their hospitals, where do they need more attention, and make sure people truly understand the importance of it. Or maybe there's just bad habits that need to be addressed in certain units. And so that's kind of what we hope to do.
Awesome. So you've designed easy to understand, easy to read dashboard to see how often support staff are staff of hospitals wash their hands before they meet
Mhm.
with patients.
Right,
It's very
right.
cool. I really love the product because it's a very interesting combination of hardware and software
Mhm.
to change behavior for the better. Um, so yeah, let's talk about the design of the dashboard. Since you were there pretty early on, creating a lot of this, uh, you started out in ideation, I imagine. So how did you transition from ideation to the design phase of the dashboard?
Yeah. So when I joined, there was already like I think they called it Gen 1 of the dashboard, and it was there were definitely uh, some obvious things we could do to enhance it from a visual design perspective. Um, and the PM at the time had already collected some feedback. And so when I first came in, I really wanted to understand how our current users uh, used the existing dashboard. So we scheduled some remote video sessions where I would have them walk through their like typical workflow. When would they log in to look at the data, etc., and have them walk us through. And found that it was really difficult the way that the data was presented for them to really understand what was happening. There was a lot of like so tables within tables that were nested, and like kind of like a table that was nested within another accordion table that then had a graph. And so it was really easy for people to just like go down a rabbit hole and get lost and not know where they came from. So quickly we understood that that was one problem. But then there was nothing really helping to tell them where to look, or to help them understand what's good or what's bad, what's normal with their data. From a visual design perspective, everything was like monotone, which is one color palette. And so one of the biggest changes that happened in the redesign of the product, which we did from the ground up, both from a coding perspective and a design perspective, is we added a truer dashboard of cards, of little insights of like, okay, well, here's your current compliance. This is where you're at currently, so that you have some anchor to understand where to go from there. Here are your top performing departments. Here's your lowest performing units. Here's how you've been doing over time to indicate progress. And then we also added what we call compliance ranges. So compliance is measured from 0 to 100%. And previously, we were just showing the percentages. But then we added in these color ranges that divided the percentages into 4 brackets. And you could consider it from like excellent, good, poor, and just awful. So something like that, so that at a quick glance, the infection preventionist can understand, okay, here's the health of my hospital in terms of hand hygiene, or here's the health of my staff within my department. And so it's much, much quicker to understand where problems were. Yeah.
Very cool. Yeah. So that sounds awesome. I've seen the product. I think it's really interesting. I'm curious, so what does your wireframing process look like? So you have this existing product. Did you jump in and create wireframes to help you fully sort of, well, I'll let you answer, but did you do this?
Yeah. So I don't have a perfect process or method. I'm still trying to like figure out what works best in what scenarios. So I've done a variety of things. When we first did the redesign, we would show up with pen and paper prototypes and Post-it notes, so that people could like move stuff around. That actually is one thing that I'm trying to still figure out, because especially with the hospital folk that we speak with, this type of testing and like prototype collaboration is very, very new and like completely out of the box for them. And so it's harder for them to engage and like feel comfortable moving stuff around. But yeah, we've done paper prototypes. We'll do that even through video conferencing sometimes. Sometimes we pick it up a notch and do more digital prototypes that are still lo-fi, and I try to keep those just black and white and only use color if it's truly necessary. So an example of this is like I mocked up a calendar that showed compliance and used the stoplight system. So to show like green days are good, yellow days are just meh, and like red days on the weekends. So maybe there's something wrong on the weekends, type of thing. So only using color when necessary and trying to keep at this stage any visual distractions out of the way, because I'm just focused on figuring out what is the right type of content, what's the right to show, and I want to make sure that the information that I'm showing is actually going to prompt some sort of action that will lead them to their goal.
Very cool.
So yeah, and then oh, sorry, and then once data and content is figured out, then we'll go higher fidelity into either animated interactions or looking at different UI. So especially with some of the data visualization, I'll just isolate it to only the UI and say, in which of these options can you tell me? I'll give them a task of like almost like a quiz, like tell me which is the second best performing person or whatever, right? You don't necessarily want to have it be the first, the best, or the worst, or something that's as obvious. You want to make them work a little bit and see if they're able to work. So I'll try to isolate my test to truly what I need to understand, whether that's UI, whether that's data content, or an interaction.
Interesting. Very cool. So you basically have some questions about your designs, and you compartmentalize those questions and try to find out and pinpoint where the usability issue could be.
Exactly. Otherwise, it's too much, and you get feedback and you don't know where to look.
That's true. Sometimes feedback is like a fire hose, and you don't know where to go. So what do you find valuable about the wireframing phase of a design process?
Yeah, it makes. It makes everything more tangible. It especially in the discovery phase, right? Like you don't know what you don't know, and so having some tangible prototype, even if it's completely wrong, helps give you a start somewhere, right? It helps people to say, oh, in reality, I don't think I would use this, versus a hypothetical conversation.
Yeah, that's interesting. So when you visualize it, then everyone can sort of focus more on, instead of using their imagination of what they think it is. Everyone has their own thoughts, their own. They will visualize it themselves, and then no one will be on the same track. So once you have something to look at, it really helps.
Yeah, and kind of going back to how I'm involved even internally with stakeholders and defining the problem and making sure we're understanding the problem. It's the same method there too.
Very cool. Yeah, interesting. So essentially, you create wireframes and you meet with the users and the stakeholders to sort of review and get feedback, again, asking questions, understanding what the usability issues are. And then you talked about jumping into visual design in the form of maybe interaction prototyping. When do you jump into full visual design of the product?
Once we just feel confident that we are able to, we've designed a UX solution for the problem at hand. So I'm trying to think of an example. I guess the one example was the reporting hand hygiene activity. So I started by looking at, what kind of patterns exist out there for reporting activity in general. So looking at things like reporting a post on Facebook or reporting a post on Instagram or Pinterest or any type of, typically in social media formats. and seeing what are the interactions and what are kind of like best practices, or even like what language do they use to encourage that behavior and encourage community policing, I guess. And then think, how do they thank them for doing that and continue encouraging that? Because ultimately, when our users report their activity and give us feedback on it, it actually will help us improve our algorithm. And so we want people to do that. And we also want people to feel like they have a way for them to be heard. So outside of just kind of like the functionality of it, I also look at some of the, I guess, emotional and psychological benefits as well. So I'll start by looking at examples, and then I'll kind of mock up pretty like typical, here's view 1, and then when they click on this thing, it'll bring them to view 2 and figure out what that flow is statically. And then I'll put it in something like InVision and just do a quick click through just to get a feel of if it feels right, did I get stuck somewhere. I'll do internal testing with a lot when it's more usability and like more of a practical test. I'll typically do what I think is called like a hallway test. Internally, send it out to a couple of coworkers here and see if they're able to accomplish it. And if they get stuck, I'll ask them questions, because something like that, something like usability, you don't necessarily need industry expertise to evaluate whether it's working or not.
That's interesting. Yeah, it's a very good point. Everyone uses the internet. Everyone uses web applications. So a lot of people do. So just talking to a regular person, you'll get a general sense if your product is usable. I love that. It's very true. Some people forget it. So some people forget it's very easy just to ask someone sitting, in the lunchroom or whatever.
Right. And part of it is determining like how are you using your resources well, right?
Yeah.
Like,
very cool. Okay, so if we talk through the process right now, you've done like stakeholder interviews and discovery from users, and then you went and you created concepts and wireframes and tested those with those users, jumped into visual design. So now you're pretty much ready to either hand it off to development, or what does it look like when you're pretty much done? Do you go, is development working hand in hand, or do you hand it off to development and do more testing?
Yeah, it's we try to involve the engineers as early as possible. So, for example, my team just came back from an on-site research session at a hospital, and afterwards we put together kind of like a presentation of all our findings, mapping out what was the goal of us going out there, what were we trying to find out, who did we talk to, what did we show them, what did we observe, all these things. And then, what are our key takeaways? What are some engineering considerations like that we have to think through logistically, and like how we would need to potentially restructure our technology. And I held and right now the only thing that exists for that concept are the lo-fi digital prototypes. And I included those in there with like customer feedback. So then I hosted a debrief session with engineers and said, hey, this is the problem that we're trying to solve. Here's why our customers would value or benefit from it. Here's what we observed, et cetera, et cetera. I'm just telling you this now so that you can start to think about it.
Yeah.
You don't have to come up with an answer now, but this is where I want to get to. It helps to set not only context, but also vision for them. And then, as we develop, I'm now able to bring them in and say, hey, what do you think about this idea? Or what do you think about this direction? And continue that conversation as we go along.
Cool. So it's all part of the process.
Yeah. And then something more, I guess, functional, again, going back to the reporting visits. The way that we presented it is through a small text link in which then presents a modal of their events, and then they're able to drag and drop. And that was just that came from a conversation with one of our engineers. It was like, this is what I want them to be able to do. Like, I want them to be able to select all these visits super fast and undo and all of this. And he was like, oh, let me show you this thing that I saw. And we're like, oh, okay, let's just use that. So sometimes it's just through conversation that solutions happen, and that's like a true collaboration.
That's very cool. Okay, so I feel like we're getting near the end here, but I'm just curious. My last real question is, now you're done. Your design has been developed, tested. You love it, and it's released. So, what happens once you deploy? You hit that button, and the world sees it now.
Yeah. This is something we're constantly trying to figure out, like, better ways of measuring what success looks like. So, before we get too far down the road, we're always kind of doing a check to see, okay, well, why are we building the thing that we're building? What is it actually going to do? And would success look like not only for our customers, but for ourselves, right? Because those two things have to meet and balance each other. And so trying to figure out what those success metrics are earlier on will then help us figure out, okay, well, once we deploy, did it meet those expectations? Or did it match? And so we're trying to figure out better tools to measure some of that outside of things like Google Analytics, or even just like doing SQL queries or Tableau or anything like that.
That's awesome. Okay, cool. Well, thank you. I kind of want to do a quick little recap of all the different things that you as a designer do creating a product. I think it's really interesting because it's not just designing wireframes and UI. So you really, at the beginning, help formulate what problem you're going to solve with the stakeholder. So you do that through like concept workshops or brainstorming sessions. And then you also talk to users before designing anything. You just talk to users to see what their perspective is too, to gather more insights. And then that's when you start sort of designing concepts, like you said, paper prototypes, creating sketches and showing people, like, does this match what we were talking about? Does this solve the problem? And then that's when, after that, all that work, you gain all that knowledge, you dive in and start designing wireframes, even some like interactions that could solve problems, which I think is really interesting. And then from there, visual design, and then deployment. And this whole time, you're also working with engineers to say, is this possible? Is this feasible? Is this good? And I think that's really interesting. So is that right? Is that feeling about right?
Yes, absolutely. Yeah.
Yep. So we're really busy people. We do a lot, not just make it pretty, which is I like everyone to know. And I just want to thank you again for joining me and talking about what you do and how you do it. I think it was really interesting.
Yeah, my pleasure. Thank you.
Of course. Well, I will talk to you later, and bye from Balsamiq. See ya.